Hey guys, I'm going to talk a little bit today about some organizational theories from our readings. What I was talking about in class for our little presentation was Max Weber's theory of democracy. So I just wanted to kind of compare it to Karl Weick's organizational theory and share a little bit about that as well. So first, when we look at Max Weber's theory of bureaucracy, we look at what makes a bureaucracy different than just a regular organization. The first thing we can see that makes it different is very specific hierarchy. You're going to have people that are obvious leaders and people that are obvious followers, and those roles don't really change a lot. People have very specific tasks as well. You have one person that's a secretary that sits at a desk and writes. You have one person that's doing this one task on the computer. So people come in and they have very specific jobs, and there's not a lot of movement back and forth or communication in between those different roles. It's also a very simple way of explaining organizational theory. And I think in general, America is moving towards a trend of more of a complex idea of organization, because I think bureaucracy is all about people have one thing to give to a company and they need to be in this one role. And we're realizing today that people are very multifaceted, that they could be in many different roles, and they thrive when they're changing and being challenged every day, not stuck in the same role. So next we're going to look a little bit at Karl Weick's organizational theory. This is a little bit more complex than Max Weber's theory of democracy or bureaucracy, because it looks at what all goes together to make an organization instead of what makes a bureaucracy different than an organization or a more specific organization. He looks at organization as a whole, and it can be applied to a lot of different companies and different groups of organizations rather than just bureaucracies. He looks at how companies and how they organize based on just communications and how communication drives organization. Then he looks at hierarchy and how it depends on how others react to it. It's an interesting perspective, and I remember someone posing a question to me: are leaders made or are they born? And I don't really know the specific answer to that. I think it depends a lot on the person, and I think a lot of times it's both. It depends on our natural biology and what characteristics we have, and also how we grew up and how we learned sort of to have charisma. I think charisma can't really be taught or studied, and it often separates people from leaders and followers naturally without them having to be in specific roles. The ability for one person to be a leader as opposed to someone as a follower, it doesn't have to be as bureaucracy denotes someone is on a track for leadership and then someone is on a track to be a follower, as someone that was in data entry as opposed to a manager that's looking over them. I think Weick sort of shows that everyone kind of has some leadership abilities within them, and they can use that, and that's more effective than just putting people, sort of pigeonholing them in one place. A good example, I think, of what Weick is talking about is the president. If you look at bureaucracy, that says that you're appointed based on your specific skills. That's where you're going to be in a task that's best for you. And then Weick says that's not specifically how people are put into roles, and they don't have just one task when they get into that role. The president has a lot of different roles within his position, and he wasn't elected based on that. He was elected based on his charisma and his character and just people's opinions, not just his skill level he brought in. And when he gets in that position, he takes on a role of a figurehead, a speaker, a decision maker, and a role model, all within that one position. And according to Weick, there are 8 main characteristics of this organizational theory. There is environment, equivocality, enactment, selection, retention, choice points, behavior cycles, and assembly rules. And I'm going to go in a little bit more in depth in each one of those and give you some examples. First, we look at the environment, and that refers to where this organization is occurring and how that affects communication. Take, for example, a floor plan of an office. Based on a closed cubicle setting, people feel like they have more trust and they have more power within that cubicle as opposed to an open floor plan where people are able to communicate more openly. That really changes how people organize and how the hierarchy of the organization is set up. Then we can look at equivocality. And this is a big word, but simply put, it refers to information that's unpredictable and things that organization is trying to limit. It's trying to limit the amount of unknowing that we have, so we know what to expect when we come into work or come into the organization. And you want to know what tasks you can do, and that helps you feel more confident in doing them as well, and it makes you feel at ease. And then we look at enactment. Enactment is when we take outside stimuli and focus on one part that we can all understand and digest a little bit easier. For example, if I showed up to work at a data security company, the goal is to make our data more secure. But this week we're going to focus on just one firewall and how to make that contribute to our larger problem of how do we make this the most secure data. It's a sort of a laser focus on one part, makes it a little bit more digestible than taking in everything as a whole. Next, we're going to look at selection. And selection is how our organization deems what's important and what's relevant to us. When we take the same data security example and we look at the layout of the website, that might be really irrelevant to what we're doing in data security, but we look at the backdoor information and the coding of the website are really relevant to what we're doing. So we can kind of disregard how the website's organized and leave that up to someone that's doing the UX or the website design, and we just focus on how people or hackers could attempt to get in through a backdoor. The next little piece is retention. Retention is the information that we save for the future. And for example, when I worked at a corporate graphic design group, we would find new fonts for every job. But when we found them, we would save them to a group-wide drive so everyone would have access to them for the future. Retaining information helped efficiency, and having a specific place for them helped organize our efforts. And that increased how our organization made us more productive. Choice points are things the organization decides to take a second look at and really hone in on. For example, in that graphic design firm, we would go back to our old file templates for creating presentations, and we would choose a team member to refresh them every 3 years or so, just to make sure they're relevant, because that's really important in our specific role as designers within the department. Then we could look at behavior cycles. Behavior cycles are how we retain information and keep information within an organization across positions. For example, if we're working in an engineering plant and there was some new protocol that spoke more about the process of securing our laptops in public, we would continue to have meetings about this procedure and keep bringing it up so it's fresh on everyone's mind, and also so it becomes a cycle and people get in the habit. We build habits based on that procedure to get it as close to perfect as we can get. Next are assembly rules, and assembly rules are things we put in place to keep those behavior cycles moving forward and making sure they're working towards our larger organizational goals. And these also limit that equivocality that we talked about earlier. They, for example, if we're at the engineering plant, we might already put a yearly meeting on the schedule where we look back at that laptop procedure and we go back over it and figure out what's working, what's not. And we kind of have an open discussion about how people are using it and are people using it, how could we make it more effective and widespread. And this helps share that information and also keeps people accountable. So overall, I think Weick's theory was a little bit more full and in-depth than Max Weber's theory, and it's a little bit more applicable to today's organizational structures as businesses and corporations are moving away from the idea of a bureaucracy and trying to figure out a more open idea of how to organize their company. A really important quote that I read about Weick goes like this: "The word organization is a noun and it's also a myth. If one looks for an organization, one will not find it. What will be found is that there are events linked together that transpire within concrete walls. And these sequences, their pathways, their timing, are the forms we erroneously make into substances when we talk about organization." So think about that for a little bit. I think it speaks a lot to what he thinks about organization, and it really contrasts with how Max Weber tried to describe organization from a bureaucracy perspective. Thanks. See you again.